that if I am approved, this is a low-hanging matter. It's something that we can process in the shortest time possible to avoid a situation like what we've had in the past 1 month of protests which are unmanaged and which have exposed us to deaths and destruction of property and a lot of inconvenience to the people of Kenya. On the second question by the leader of the majority party, it is true that we have experienced a number of security incidents that should not have happened in the first place. And let me say that first and foremost, the Shakahola incident didn't happen when it became public. It happened over quite a number of years, and it's an indictment actually on our ability as a country to be able to prevent some of these sophisticated crimes from hurting our people. I am on record to having apologized on behalf of previous and the present administration for that breach, because the radicalization and the criminal activity around Shakahola began in 2019-2020. But the manifestation in terms of people dying and being buried was something that happened sometimes in 2022. And the Shakahola incidents will remain the most tragic security breach in the history of our country. We have never had a security breach of that magnitude in our country. We have learned the lessons. 2 days ago, the task force that the president had appointed has helped to give us some of the recommendations on what we need to do to avoid that going forward. But also, we believe that the public officials, including security officers who are in charge, must also have their day in being made accountable. We had proposed the establishment of a commission of inquiry to help us put together the accountability process so that we can have recommendations on prosecution and other action. But the commission of inquiry was stopped by our courts, and we were unable to move. But with or without the commission of inquiry, I want to assure the people of Kenya, if I am approved, one of my priorities will be to make sure that the accountability for the crimes in Shakahola by public officials, including security managers of all arms, of all agencies of the state, must proceed as a way of making sure that we do not have this kind of thing happening again. It is true also recently we had an incident which is actively under investigations around Kware area. Again, the same reasons, gaps in the Ngao and Nyumba Kumi structures, and also our intelligence collection ability. And I just want to say that now that we have finalized the proposals and we know what we need to do to reform our National Police Service, my next assignment, if I am approved by this House, will be to initiate far-reaching reforms in the national government administration system to ensure that we restructure the Ngao system, make it more responsive, modernize it, and distribute it to the lowest level in a manner which helps us to avoid incidents like this when we have serious security breaches, yet we have government officials paid by the people of Kenya to make sure that the country is safe. So I want to admit those were very unfortunate incidents, and national security being a work in progress and a perpetual project, we have learned the lessons, and we are going to make sure that we strengthen and seal the gaps to ensure that we make our homeland safer than it has been before. Thank you.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the nominee, Professor Abraham, that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, he is one of the two people who have been reappointed to the cabinet to the same docket that they were serving previously, the last 2 years. I want to ask you a question, Professor, that what do you think makes you feel that you can serve in that docket again? Because why I'm asking that question is because if you look at what happened in the last 2 months in this country, the demonstrations and the kind of things that happened, in my view, you look like somebody who was lost. Your presence was not being felt. Your omnipresence was not being felt, if I may say so, because you could see abductions were happening, human rights abuses were happening, but the minister's voice was not being heard in that situation. What do you think, what makes you think that you can serve again in the same docket? But the next question is that you have also seen widely, you have been widely accused the last 2 months or the last 1 year that you've presided over human rights abuses from time you've been appointed CS till last month. Particularly what happened, for example, on 25th of July 2024. And also during the Azimio demonstrations last year. More than 75 Kenyans lost their lives. And last month also, more than 50 Kenyans lost their lives. So there's a feeling that the national police response to protest is stuck in the old way of doing things. So the question is, to what extent do you think ministerial responsibility for the brutality meted on Kenyans by security organs? At what level do you think you can take responsibility for that? What new ways are you going now to do to stop that? So my question is, in spite of all these abuses that have happened, in spite of all the problems that Kenyans have encountered, what is this new idea that you will employ this time if you are approved by this House? Because one of the things we are looking at, Professor, Chairman, is the suitability of the person to hold that office. What makes you think you are suitable in spite of all those problems that you have encountered the last 2 months? Thank you, Chair.
Professor, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and honorable members. I was in office for 21 months, 623 days. I can account for each and every day of my stay in office. I woke up every day, and my focus has been to ensure that our country is safe. I have risen before dawn every day, including Sundays, and gone to sleep very late, simply because of the demands of our homeland security. I believe that I am suitable for reappointment because during those 21 months, during those 623 days, I have been able to keep the country fairly safe, especially in the fight against terror. Previously, we had an escalation around 2021-2022 of terror attacks in northern Kenya and the Boni Enclave. And in the past 2 years, approximately, we've had stability in northern Kenya and Lamu. I believe I am suitable, Honorable Speaker, because the crime of banditry has been reduced significantly, in my estimation, by more than 75%, even if pockets of insecurity continue to be experienced. And we do know where the gaps are and what needs to be done to even bring this problem to a complete end. Mr. Speaker, I have visited all the 47 counties, some of the counties numerous times. I've been to Lamu 21 times in 21 months. I've been to Samburu 8 times. I've been to Baringo 13 times. I've been to many other counties. And therefore, I have not been lazy. I've been diligent. And I've conducted myself within the parameters of Article 73, which requires me to conduct myself in a manner that brings honor to the nation and dignity to the office I hold. I have worked with officers at the headquarters, but I've also sat down in numerous meetings to work with officers at regional, county, and sub-county levels to make sure that we share decision-making processes and decision implementation processes. I believe, Mr. Speaker, the question has been directed to the events of the recent weeks. And I want to respond as follows. That the reason that I didn't talk every day is because the events the Honorable Member is referring to were mainly operational issues. The work of the Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, as envisaged in Article 245 of the Constitution, is to give the organs of national security that fall under that ministry policy direction and policy guidance, and in particular because we are talking about the police. Mr. Speaker, the police is under independent command, Article 245, paragraph 2. There are only two people who can give the Inspector General of Police directives. First, the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, but only on policy issues. Number two, the the Director of Public Prosecutions in matters in investigations of criminal activities. Other than that, operational matters are handled by the command of the National Police Service, and therefore the Minister doesn't give operational directives. We have communicated the policy during my time in office, the policy of the Kenya Kwanza administration on policing, which includes zero tolerance on extrajudicial killings, zero tolerance on abuse of human rights, and restraints in the use of force. Limited only, the use of force being limited only to cases contemplated in the Constitution and the National Police Service Act and the schedule thereto in the defense of life of the officer or the life of the people of Kenya. Therefore, it is unfortunate that during a recent protests, we witnessed the death of 42 Kenyans. We also had injuries, 486 civilians and 385 police officers were injured. We had about 1,387 arrests. We had 54 police cars destroyed and 110 motor vehicles belonging to the people of Kenya also destroyed in those protests. And therefore, I want to submit as follows, that the operational responsibility of policing lies with the command of the National Police Service. It is my estimation that on a broader scale of things, generally, the police tried their best to protect the country against mobs of criminals, arsonists, and other dangerous people, including those who visited Parliament and wanted to kill parliamentarians and other people. The police did their best. And in the event, as it is possible, that any officer went beyond what is allowed in terms of the use of force, it is now the work of the Independent Police Oversight Authority and other accountability agencies to help the country to bring to closure the issue of justice for excess use of force. I want to submit as follows, Mr. Speaker, that even beyond the police having independent operational command, the issue of the use of firearms by a police officer is individual. If you read the National Police Service Act and the Schedule 6 to that Act, every police officer has individual responsibility on how they use firearms. You cannot, the Inspector General of Police will not be there to tell the police, the officer, shoot this one, don't shoot this one. There will be an operational order that will generally guide the police officer. So the accountability of the IG will be on the operational order, which is publicly available, whether that operational order met the constitutional threshold, but the use of force by individual officers is an individual responsibility issue. Other than that, I commend generally those officers who tried their best in very difficult circumstances to help the country come to terms with what happened, and hope and will see to it, if I am reappointed, that the accountability for those who violated the law is pursued conclusively. I submit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This question will just require yes or no. So then I'll be able to ask the next one. So Professor Kindiki, are you aware that for the last 2 years we have internally displaced persons in parts of the North Rift, that is Samburu County, parts of Baringo, Elgeyo Marakwet, and other parts of the North Rift? It's a yes or no?
Yes.
So if this committee finds you suitable to hold this office again, what measures will you put in place to see that these families go back to their homes, and especially going children will go back to school and people can go back to their homes and live peacefully? Mr. Speaker, allow me to ask the last question, which is also, are you aware that there are people in the North Rift who were killed in broad daylight, in marketplaces, in towns, for example, in Samburu West, in Suguta town? There have been abductions, and this current administration, which you served in, during its campaigns and has continuously said that you will not have issues of abductions, issues of extrajudicial killings, but I want to put it across to you that it has been happening. There are people in those counties who are missing to date. They have been abducted. I want to ask you whether you're aware, and we have sufficiently been informed that it is alleged that it is security officers who have abducted these people. Is that one of your measures of ensuring insecurity is settled in these areas? And do you think, as a professor of constitutionalism and ensuring we follow the Constitution, is that the right way in ensuring fair justice even to those who are accused?
Professor?
Mr. Speaker, now that the kinetic operations that we launched in February 2023 has yielded significant fruits, the issue of the North Rift will not be complete until those that were displaced because of the violence meted upon them by bandits, groups and gangs are returned to their homes. And therefore, it is going to be my priority, if I am approved by this House, to make sure that in line with the rights of every Kenyan under the Constitution and the relevant instruments, including international instruments on the prevention of internal displacement, we're going to resettle, facilitate the resettlement and reintegration of all communities that were displaced by the menace of banditry. Secondly, I've been asked to respond to the allegations about abduction. During my tenure as minister, I made it clearly, clear to the police that abductions, extrajudicial killings, and extra-constitutional means of apprehending offenders is against government policy, is against the Constitution, is against international law. I must hasten to say my observation, because I've been in the front line more than any other place, especially in North Rift, in northern Kenya, and the Boni Enclave. The officers who served in the special units in counter-terrorism and counter-banditry, the formed-up units, have been quite professional, generally. But just as I've said in the previous question, in the event there are any infractions, there are any reported infractions and excesses by the special forces that are helping us to fight banditry, again, IPOA and other accountability mechanisms must be put in place to ensure that we do not spoil the very good work that is being done by our officers in the front line. Some of them have died, others have lost limb, officers have been destituted.
Point of order, Chairman, I was saying that, the nominee is a professor, and professors teach in the university, so he can answer questions like somebody who's in class teaching us. I was requesting through the chairman that he can do faster. Chair.
Professor, be concise and precise and to the point.
I submit.
Thank you. Nelson, we'll just come around. Yes.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Professor Kindiki, it's unprecedented that twice in 2 years we've had to apply Section 241 of our Constitution in deploying our officers, our military officers, to back up the police, both to quell the protest and initially sent to the North Rift. What exactly is the state of our police force? There are so many things that are flying around, gossip, that number one, our officers, police officers could be demoralized. Number two, is there a situation that you feel the police at some point are very hesitant to execute some of the assignments they're given because of lack of morale? And you as a CS, the accusations that you've not helped in boosting the morale of our police officers. What exactly is the state of our police force?
Professor?
Mr. Speaker, yes, we have applied Article 241 twice. And I think there is nothing abnormal with that, Mr. Speaker, because that is why that article exists. So that whenever there is need, the National Police Service may request the support of the Kenya Defence Forces to handle either an emergency or a disastrous situation. On the case of the North Rift, it was important to get the support of the KDF because At that time, the National Police Air Wing had collapsed. Right now, it's operational. We didn't have air assets. We didn't have adequate long-range unmanned aerial vehicles, and therefore we needed the support of the military. But the effort in North Rift is police-led. In fact, the military has been supportive in the peripheries, police-led. Even in terms of numbers, we have 4,500 police officers against less than 1,000 KDF officers. With regard to the recent emergency we had, again, what we had on 25th of June was unprecedented. And our calling of the KDF was simply to put them on standby should they be needed. And you've seen they have not been needed. But it was a precaution because the criminals who wanted to ban Parliament were also threatening to ban State House and other critical installations. So if that was not reason enough to put KDF on standby legally, I don't think any other situation would have met threshold, because what we faced in the last month, in our view, was existential threat, not just to the arms of government, but to the state itself. And therefore, the police is in good shape. There are issues of welfare, which we are handling. I've already mentioned about the salary increments, which we have started implementing. There's issues around housing. There are also issues about the leave and so forth and so on. Medication, I've just talked about the hospital that we've established for them, fully fledged level 4 hospital. We have one for the border police again, which again we operationalized under my leadership in Kanyonyo for the formed up units. So yes, there is more to be done, but it is not true to say that the police force is demoralized. They have done a good job, and when it's necessary, we have called in the KDF in accordance with the law when we feel that the situation is an emergency. I submit.
Posing.
I thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Professor and Honorable Chairman, I want to rely on section, I'm on this side, Professor. I want to rely on section 6 and section 7 of the Act in terms of suitability of the candidate to the position he has been nominated. And in this respect, Honorable Speaker, I want to take the minister in terms of suitability on his credibility in terms of respecting what he says, in terms of implementing what he says. Because this is the second time he's been given a chance. And Speaker, I want also the nominee to know that absence of war is not necessarily peace. Whatever is happening in the North Rift, Honorable Speaker, there is relative peace. There's no war, but it might not necessarily mean peace. What am I saying, Honorable Speaker? The candidate, as an example, the candidate came to the North Rift. We had engagement as leaders of the North Rift, and specifically West Pokot County, as an example of the entire country. I don't know what happened, so what the minister did in the other places, but possibly maybe he did what he did in West Pokot, which is we agreed on a number of issues, Honorable Speaker, in terms of strategies of bringing peace, including establishment of sub-locations or bringing even the security near to the people so that we avoid the Shakahola things and so on. And the minister agreed with the Honorable Speaker with us in West Pokot. And we also agreed to put security in strategic areas. It might happen in other parts of the country. The minister agreed. And Speaker, nothing happened. Nothing has happened so far. Now, if Parliament sees it fit and approves the minister again for this position, what's going to happen? What is the minister going to do different, Honorable Speaker, to gain credibility among people, among Kenyans themselves, who might feel that the minister lied to them? And finally, Speaker, take home for the minister. This idea of giving police accounting as an accounting, or to manage their own money as an accounting officer. I want the minister to take home in terms of the security, the strategic security of this country. What does that mean in terms of security of this country? Going into the future, there are critics, Honorable Speaker, that say, how do you give the police the gun and you also give them the money? What's going to happen? It might pose a serious security in this country going forward, maybe many years in the future. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true
Those
that...
are just two simple questions. Did you honor what you did and said in Pokot? And is the police fund tenable? Very simple.
Mr. Speaker, it is true that some of the things that I promised have not been realized, especially the issue of operationalization of new administrative units. But it is also true that some of the things I promised have been realized, and I thought the honorable member would be kind enough to notify the House and the country that during the same consultations I had promised that we will provide, train and equip 200 National Police Reservists for West Pokot, which we did. Number two, we had promised to set up a security camp at a place formerly called Lami Nyeusi, which is now called Lami Nyeupe, which we did, and so many other things we did. But the issue of the units is outstanding, and not just for West Pokot, but also for a few other counties, including some parts of Baringo, Samburu, and a few other counties that did not benefit from the operationalization of units, and that is work that we are going to complete if we are reappointed. On the second question, I do not think there is a problem with giving the National Police Service money and control over resources relating to their operations. The operational budgets of the police must be run by the National Police Service themselves, and not by the ministry, not by the office of the president. And in my view, if there are issues of lack of effectiveness, it is not because the police have their own budget. If anything, it should help them even work more efficiently. Therefore, the question should be, now that the police have their operational budget, what prevents them from serving the people of Kenya in a better manner? And those are issues that we'll be looking at if we are reappointed.
In any case, Parliament oversights the use of that money. Gikaria?
Thank you, Chair. Professor Kindiki, in the recent past in this demonstration, two young men, Michael Kihunga Nyagodhie and another young man called Kevin Maganga, were shot dead in Nakuru. The family has been trying to get some information from IPOA. It is alleged that the the IPOA is not receiving required information from the police service. This has posed a great challenge to IPOA executing its oversight mandate. If approved for this appointment, Honorable Kindiki, what steps will you take to ensure that the two institutions work seamlessly for the benefit of Kenyans? And secondly, how will you strengthen IPOA so as to execute its mandate? Second, the Honorable Chair, is about urban criminal gang activities. In the urban areas, particularly in Nakuru, a criminal gang called Confirm, which by what the citizens claim has brought about 5 deaths in every month and hundreds of injuries. Maybe if you're approved and confirmed, what are the steps that you'll take to reduce the increase of criminal activities in urban areas, and particularly in Nakuru, specifically the confirmed criminal gang? Thank you, Chair.
Professor.
Mr. Speaker, on the first issue, the relationship between IPOA and the National Police Service is an ongoing conversation, and it's not unusual. It happens all over the world that the police and the bodies oversight them have normal institutional tensions. We have, during our tenure in office, we have encouraged these institutions to work together because each one of them is playing an important role. It is the same problem we had between the police service and the Police Service Commission, and we did a lot of work and around that, and were able to get a win-win situation where the commission and the police service are working together. So we'll apply the same methods if we are reappointed to make sure that IPOA gets the support it requires from the NPS, and going forward we will support IPOA in terms of more resources, more capacity, but also just brokering the institutional goodwill between themselves and the police. The second question, Mr. Speaker, is on the criminal gangs. It is true, we have had a gang in Nakuru known as Confirm, and urban crime is a major issue. When I took over as CS for Interior, October 2022, there was a lot of gang violence and gang crime in Nairobi. We've been able to reduce and suppress the Nairobi urban criminal activity significantly. We hope that the Nakuru matter could also be resolved, and before I was dismissed from office, I had had a meeting with the leaders of Nakuru County, and we had agreed that according to the feedback the leaders gave us, we needed to change the command, because sometimes many of these performance issues are based on the right command. So we are going to work on it to ensure that we eliminate that gang and other urban gangs in Mombasa and a few other towns that are suffering the same problem.
Robert Mbui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Professor, Kenya's constitution borrows very heavily from the US one, particularly issues to do with the Bill of Rights. And you swore to uphold this constitution and protect it. Recently, you saw in the US that a gunman tried to shoot a presidential nominee and was actually brought down. But despite that, and even missed, but despite that, the head of Secret Service resigned their post. Now in Kenya, during your tenure as CS, over 100 Kenyans have been killed, murdered by the police. You know that maybe over 1,000 people have been injured, and property worth billions of shillings has been destroyed. Not to forget that a lot of Kenyans have also been abducted, and as we are talking, there are still people, families that are still looking for their loved ones. Now, we did see that the Inspector General of Police resigned. Do you think that as a CS, you should not also have taken responsibility, political responsibility for that failure that the resignation confirms, and also either resigned or declined the appointment? It's also important to note that during these demos that were held, a lot of people were shot, and there is clamor and request and for justice. In fact, I've attended, one of them was a constituent, Erickson Mutisia, and we've gone to those funerals, and the families are asking for justice. You have forensic evidence because you have the bullets, and you know that every bullet that comes from a gun can be traced. Why have we not seen arrests and arraignment in court of the police officers that are accused or that were involved in these shootings? Because that would appease the public a little bit. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to also point out that the CS has had, the nominee has had a very illustrious career. And, PhD, you've done consultancy all over. And when you are here for the approval hearings in 2022, after all those many years of working, your wealth was at 544 million. Now, 2 years later, your wealth now is at 694 million. That is a whopping 150 million shillings more. Maybe you could explain to us, is this increase probably related to the office that you hold? It would be important for us to know. And finally, Mr. Speaker.
Too many questions, Robert.
Mr. Speaker, just one last one, because we are doing very well with time, Mr. Speaker. Just one last one, which is because I'm just picking out some of the things that some of the members have said on the matters of insecurity and criminal gangs, Mr. Speaker, that have been out there mugging our people. There's burglaries, you know, in the North Rift, there are all these issues of cattle rustling and all that, which you have admitted there are issues. Now, my question is, when you know that we have such insecurity in the country, what was the logic behind making a decision to send 1,000 police officers to go and secure Haiti when Kenya has a problem? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Professor.
Mr. Speaker, those are 3 questions. The first one, the Honorable Boy asked about whether I should have resigned. The example the member gave about US, where the candidate for presidency was nearly killed, raises a number of issues. One, he says the person who attempted that was killed. That demonstrates use of force, even in our local context, is allowed, because nobody raised issues with that criminal who was wanted to kill Donald Trump. He was shot dead without questions. Number 2, the honorable member has said that the director of the Secret Service resigned, but also drew a parallel and said our IG also resigned. The minister did not resign in the US. I don't know why the Kenyan minister must resign. And nobody asked the minister to resign, because ministers don't instruct operations, they instruct policy. I can only resign if my policy instruction is unconstitutional or illegal. Then, on the question of those unfortunate incidents when Kenyans lost their lives and the quest for justice, I strongly believe that there must be justice, and every death that occurred must be accounted for. However, Mr. Speaker, the process of putting together criminal investigations, including forensic evidence, is not something that can be rushed. It takes a bit of time all over the world, not just in Kenya. I believe IPOA should help the country to get closure, and I have promised, if I am reappointed, I'll encourage the collaboration and support and goodwill between IPOA and the police in terms of providing information so that justice is served. I have also been asked about my wealth, which has increased from 544 million to 694 million. It is true, because first, let me start by saying that I have not benefited from any improper business. I have not done any business with government. Let's start from there. I have not applied for any tender by myself, by proxy, by relative, or by anybody. Mr. Speaker, before I was appointed, my wealth was at 544 million. I said at that time, which I still do now, that I have run a business, which today I do not participate in that business. I don't practice law, but my law firm is alive and working, and much of that revenue has actually come through the revenue from my law firm, which is still active but being managed by other people. I think all my salary and allowances have been spent in paying bills. Therefore, most of the increment in my net worth is because of 3 things. One, the legal fees, some of which was actually pending by the time I was being appointed. And I said it here, that there are some unpaid legal fees, which some of them were paid. In fact, I remember 2 months after I was appointed, one of the clients paid a significant amount of legal fees, which had been pending. Other than that, I do small businesses and so forth and so on. None of my money has come from the public except the salary and the allowances that I'm entitled to. Lastly, on Haiti, it is true that the government of Kenya, through the National Security Council, decided to deploy our officers in Haiti pursuant to a request by the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. These are international obligations. It has not affected our operations, and it is not true to say that since there are problems in Kenya, we cannot also do our international obligations, because all countries in the world do have security issues. They have security matters. Even the country you consider safest has its own security matters. And therefore, it is a great honor for our officers to serve in Haiti. So far, they are doing a good job. I believe they will profile Kenya properly. They will bring honor to our country. And that deployment has not affected our operational capabilities. I submit.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you.
Don't be like your neighbor. Ask one question.
I'll ask only one question, Mr. Speaker. Professor Kindiki, in your first stint as CS Interior, you are associated with strong statements, such as "we will crush you," you'll be met with the full force of the law, "we will deal with you firmly and deadly," and many other words like that. Statements which seem to fuel police extrajudicial action. And Kenyans have taken notice of such statements that probably they fuel police extrajudicial action, and the use of excessive force, because if you tell people we'll crush you, the police will crush you, that's what it will entail. As you see now, there's a new awakening in this country about what public officers are saying. How different will you be if we approve you? Secondly, you are also the civilian face among the police and the security organs that we have. But as you took up this job, probably Professor Kindiki, you became more of them, more of a police officer, not a civilian within. You are donning police uniform, you are all over police choppers, and you behaved like a police officer. Which probably took you away from the police direction that you're supposed to give the forces, and became more of an operational leader instead of a policy director in the force. How will you be different on this? And probably lastly, you are more in the sky than on earth. When you want to give policy direction, you want to give guiding, you need to be in office, have meetings, boardrooms, and give policy direction. But you have said you actually went to Lamu 21 days, 21 times in 21 months. And probably in the operation field more than where you are required to give operational or to give policy guidance and direction. And that's why the police force and the administration, national government administration, is not properly coordinated. How different will you be when we approve you as CS? I thank you.
Professor?
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I've been asked to say whether I'll change my language. Mr. Speaker, I need to clarify that it is true I have used very, very unique language. But Mr. Speaker, this is security language. And the people I address when I use those terminologies are not the law-abiding citizens of Kenya. The people I address with that difficult terminology or unique terminology are terrorists bandits, organized criminals. Those are the people I tell will crush you, and I mean it. Last time I appeared before here, the member for Samburu West asked me what I will do in Kurkur and other places when criminals descend into gorges, and I'll say I'll flatten the gorges. We've done a bit of that. There were places in Baringo, Corcoran Hills, a place called Tandare, a place called Ngelecha, and in Samburu, the Malaso Valley and other places where criminals would always retreat and have a field day, operate from there. We've neutralized them and removed them from there. So, again, the use of force is permitted by law, depending on who that force is used against and in what circumstances. And the escalation methods are used. You start by asking them to surrender. If they don't, you use other methods until, if they challenge you or they want to kill police officers, the police officers will kill them before they kill the officer. That is the law. Mr. Speaker, on the second issue, I have been there at headquarters driving policy in boardrooms, Arambe House. I've had so many meetings in our campuses in Kiganjo, in Embakasi, Roiro, Police Leadership Academy. But I've also been in the field more. Why? To disseminate policy to our forward operating bases, to our camps, to our officers in the field, in the counties. And even in the counties, before I even start my meetings, I would sit with the county security committee in a boardroom, disseminate the policy, because they are the ones who will be left to implement. And I have also been in the most dangerous spots in our territory with our officers in the front line. Why? To give them moral support, that we have not posted them there to die. We have posted them there to protect the country, and there is no greater morale booster than for the security minister to go and visit the officers, have lunch with them, encourage them, and tell them what the government policy is and what the government thinks about them. So it has been very rewarding. I will be back in the normal manner, but I will of course balance between my headquarters work and also the field work. Lastly, I've been asked to land. I have always landed. For every flight, I have landed. And finally, on the issue of uniform, what I wear is tactical attire, because there are some things which protective clothing that you need tactical wear to be able to have protective clothing and protective facilities, because you're in a dangerous situation. I don't wear that on the streets of Nairobi. And also I have been in not just police helicopters, but military helicopters, because the law provides that the security minister be facilitated when he is in dangerous situations. The Minister for Interior, the Minister for Defense must be facilitated, because the nature of our work is we are exposed to risk and danger by virtue of office. Otherwise, I do not fancy it's only that it's all in a day's job.
Murugara. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On a CS nominee, let me take you away from the police officers, the bandits, and all these other insecurity matters you're dealing with, back to national government administration. I recollect very well that when you were here, we actually questioned you on it lastly during the vetting, and emphasized that the nerve center of the national government administration is in the villages. That we do have very serious workers in the villages who possibly are not recognized by the national government, but who play a key role in the service and security provision and everything else, so that we can avert incidents like the Shakahola and the quarry incidents we've talked about. Here I'm talking about the village elders and the Nyumba Kumi workers, whom you use extensively 24 hours every day, every month and every year, and in a form of service which is very similar to servitude or some form of modern day slavery. These people are not remunerated. Your response that time was that a policy was going to be put in place immediately, and that they would actually start getting a form of remuneration. The question I have to you is, how far has that gone, and when should these people expect their paycheck? Whether check, whether M-Pesa, whether whatever is going to be, when should they expect to be paid?
Mr. Speaker, sir, we finalized the Village Elders Bill 2024. It is one of the 12 pieces of legislation that are awaiting cabinet approval for transmission to Parliament, and therefore that matter will be sorted out in the shortest time possible. I submit.
Waziri, I want you to again go back to Haiti, where we actually deployed almost 600 police officers. My fear now is that with what is happening around there, the fact one of my voters at home has one of his son actually deployed. And the question is, how secure? Do you have special security, insurance for this particular, just in case something has happened? Of course, that has led to a deficit of police officers. That's why when you had demonstration here, you had to get in the army because we don't have enough police officers, so because some of them are away. Secondly, I also have had a case in North Rift. In fact, my colleague is just walking in. The North Rift, where you have this police reservists have been disarmed, and yet we have problem in North Rift. And those are my borders, and we have that problem. And yet you have actually disarmed the police reservists. What are you doing about that?
Professor will take Dawood, note the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CS nominee, you have promised regarding passports a couple of times, and you know passports are the most important. You initially said within a day, within a week, within 2 weeks, but apparently the passport issue has not been sorted out. The other issue is regarding the IDs. Your department has rolled out that IDs will be 10 years, whereas we have known all along IDs did not have an expiry date. What informed the decision for that one? Because now we've got Maisha number, which has been already declared unconstitutional. But what was the point of launching Maisha number when we had a Huduma number which did not work? So now, first was we've got the original ID, now Huduma number, now Maisha number. So aren't we confusing everything? Can't we have just one, the ID to be upgraded instead of all those, and data protection? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Professor, you can answer those from Ferdinand and Rahim.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the question by the member for Kwanza, Haiti is a United Nations mission. Therefore, our officers are covered, insured, paid for by the United Nations, and therefore there is no cause of alarm. But it's also good to report good progress so far because the officers there have been able to get part of the critical infrastructure, the port, the airport, the main police station have been recovered, and the hospital have been recovered from the gangs. And some of the gang leaders who were taunting us before have even signed for peace and are willing to engage. So they are doing a good job. We are praying for them. We hope there will be no untoward incidents. With regard to the second issue from the member for Kwanza, it is true we disarmed 400 National Police Reservists who were serving in Trans Nzoia. And there was a reason, because the NPRs were being misused. Number two, Trans Nzoia is fairly peaceful, except along the border, small issues. So we will be vetting and returning on a needs basis a smaller number of NPRs, but the number of 400 NPRs in Trans Nzoia was disproportionate with the challenge that we have in that county compared to other counties that are a little more needy. Then finally, the member for Imenti North asked about passports. When I assumed office, the passport was a crisis like no other. Kenyans were waiting for a year, 6 months, 3 months, 8 months. They were bribing. They had to bribe to get passports. We had no printers, and so forth and so on. Today, we have not only paid the pending bills to the suppliers, we have enough printing equipment for personalization of passports. We have even upscaled our system, that is the ICT system, and we have cleared the backlog from 784,000 when it was at the highest, and today there's no backlog. We are issuing passports within 7 days, starting 1st of August, today. That was our deadline. We complied with that deadline 4 weeks ago, at the beginning of July. Our next deadline is therefore to bring the passports waiting period to 3 days by 1st of November this year. And we are on course. I am very happy. This is one area where we've made a lot of progress. Of course, there are small challenges here and there. We believe that we've not eradicated corrupt staff completely. We have a new crop of staff, about 120, but we are not sure that corruption has been eradicated from that directorate, and we are working on that to ensure, we'll be working on that if we are approved, to ensure that we clean up the whole place. With regard to IDs and Huduma number and Maisha number, the reason for the 10-year limit is because of technology, because unlike the ID that we are used to, the second generation ID we have, the third generation ID is a technology card, and technology keeps on growing old, and therefore that's why we have a 10-year period, and that's why even passports, they normally have a time frame. You cannot have a passport for life. That is the idea. It is not to punish Kenyans. The card has a bit of technology chips, and we want to upgrade that chip based on the security threats that will be identified by that time. The Maisha number issue is before court. We hope we will vacate the orders that were issued 2 days ago, because the problem we are having with delays with issuance of IDs is because of court orders. Last year, between November and March this year, there was a court injunction against us issuing IDs, which brought a huge backlog of almost 600,000. We cleared that backlog. We were actually left with 92,000 with those in the waiting list. And then another court injunction was issued again 2 days ago. We hope we'll be vacating it by Friday, hopefully, so that we can be able to move on with issuing IDs to the people of Kenya. I submit.
Mercy.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Let me take you to the budgets. Following the recent government budget cuts across all sectors, what innovative ways will you use to mitigate the negative impacts of the budget cuts in the Ministry of Interior and National Security? Secondly, what will you prioritize if approved? What programs will you prioritize, and what will be the impact of implementing those priorities? And Kenyans are also asking, because of the unemployment situation in the country, is the recruitment of police officers affected by the budget cuts? And if not, what innovative ways again will you use to recruit them differently? Because as it stands, Kenyans are concerned that recruitment of police officers has become a preserve of the rich or of those who can afford to sell some land. So how are you going to make sure that employment opportunities in the Ministry of Interior are open to all Kenyans, irrespective of their tribe, their religion, where they come from, whether they have money or not? Thank you.
Hold, Professor. Yes, Missy, take those two.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prof, you'll go down the history as the first minister to be vetted twice in one term, one presidential term. Of course, the others who are coming, but for now you are the first, and that history will not be, will be there forever. And I'll take you back to what you said in the Senate, that history is replete with strong and powerful dictators who were brought down by the power of the people. And I dare say you've been brought back here to this vetting by the power of the people. I want to refer you to an event because you are a member of the National Security Council. This is the core of the security of this nation. I want to refer you to an event in history in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, something I know you are much aware of because you are an international law student or professor. During this time, the then president of US, J.F. Kennedy, had a standoff with the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. And there was an ex-com committee members, comprising of 14 members, almost akin to what we have here as the National Security Council. All those 14 members agreed that to deploy. It took J.F. Kennedy brother's advice to do otherwise. I'm not asking you to be consulting your brother, but if it were not for the brother's advice, then we could have experienced the first nuclear war to the destruction of the world. Now, I look at the events that have happened here as a result of either good or bad decision of the National Security Council. And just like somebody said that there is always an inclination towards consensus, even if a decision is bad, that the committee of people could easily incline towards psychological consensus to the destruction or to the results of a bad decision. Does National Security Council of this republic also suffer from groupthink? Groupthink in a way that there is no devil's advocate to give an alternative decision making that can save the country. Then, Speaker, if you may allow me the last, very brief. You've tried to explain the donning of the uniform, the police uniform. What surprises me, Prof, is that you give instructions to police, you give press conferences, you are adorned in the uniform of the police. But when it comes to the crimes committed against humanity by the police, that's where you say the police are independent. How independent is your uniform?
Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the budget cuts, we will prioritize what we consider the 5 biggest national security threats in our programming. And those are the threats of terror, organized crime, drugs, the need for drug controlling narcotic drugs, the fight against climate change, and also extremism in its various forms, religious, political, or whatever extremism. because extreme behavior can annihilate the nation. With regard to recruitment, going forward, we will ensure that each and every Kenyan, boy or girl who is recruited, can be accounted for. Because in the past, we've had so many claims of corruption and so many claims of favoritism, and therefore going forward, it's going to be demanded from the police that they account for every recruitment slot that they fill. We have a big problem of corruption in the country, and we hope the National Police Leadership Academy and the programs we want to put there as we look for succession management and new managers of security will be able to fight corruption in the National Police Service. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Amisi asked me, I think the first was just a comment. He said, I've been brought here by the power of people, and I want to say happily, yes. Happily, yes. With regard to the second, and I say happily because it's important for public officials to be put under scrutiny and be measured using the highest possible threshold. So I have no issues, I have no problem. Even if I'm brought here 20 times, I will happily come up and try and explain myself to the people of Kenya and to the representatives of the people of Kenya. I've been asked, the second one, the last one, from the Honorable Amisi, was on whether the National Security Council is suffering from groupthink, and the answer is no. I submit.
Mukami? Honorable Mukami?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to ask our Waziri one question from a police officer who is concerned. I understand there is a court battle in the court since 2018 between the police constables. There are those who are earning higher salaries than the others. That means there are those who are in job group J, they are earning more salary, and that is why they had gone to the court, because they want to understand why there is a discrimination. The other question, it's about our police officers. Waziri, as you know, our officers really do a lot of work. What policy are you going to put into place to motivate our police officers? Because there are those officers who have stayed in one station for over 20 years. They've never been promoted, they've been never transferred, they are just there in that station. So we need to motivate them. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Mishi, Honorable Mishi.
Thank you, Honorable Chairman. Honorable Chairman, I want to ask Professor one question. Professor, as the women of this country, we are shocked and we are sick to see the rising number of femicide cases. In fact, we are really shocked when we saw the bodies which were discovered at the quarry, because all the bodies were for ladies or other women. I don't know what is the root cause of this. What contribute to all this? Who slept on the job? We need to know some answers on these issues. Second, Honorable Chairman, I know he has answered issues on the issue of officers using excessive force during protest, but I also wanted to hear from him, what future plans do you have to ensure that future protests are going to be managed in a way that there'll be no loss of lives? Thank you, Honorable Chairman.
Professor?
Mr. Speaker, sir. With regard...
Hold, Professor Emasa, you have a point of order?
I think the nominee forgot to respond to mine.
Which one?
It was on the budget and the issue of recruitment.
He did.
I think I can respond together.
He did.
Okay.
He did, very clearly. I know I was misleading you to raise that issue.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the police officers who have been in court about salaries, mainly these were graduate police constables, people or officers who joined at constabulary level. During their time, they went to school and studied for a degree. They have been arguing that they need to be taken straight to inspectorate. And there has been a long court battle. As soon as that court matter is settled by the apex court, we'll implement whatever decision will come from our judiciary. With regard to that matter going forward, we will implement the recommendations of the Maraga Task Force, which creates two-tier police service where you can serve in the lower ranks, and the academic requirements are different. You serve from constable to senior sergeant, or you enter the police service at inspectorate level if you are a graduate as a cadet, so that we professionalize a little more the police service and also expedite leadership generation through cadets who can assume responsibility as OCSs and commanders at county level and so forth, to avoid a situation where you have officers seeking to extend their time in office at senior levels simply because of a lack of generation of younger commanders. With regard to the motivation, we are working with the National Police Service Commission, and if I am approved, I will proceed with this discussion to provide a clearer policy on promotions, transfers, and some form of reward system which will help motivate our officers. At the moment, before I left office, we were implementing the 3-year transfer policy. I think we were at 45% compliance because of the logistical and the financial implications. If I am reappointed, if I am approved by this House, I will complete that 3-year transfer policy to make sure that it happens. And also, we will have a fast-track promotion arrangement for officers who do very well. For example, if you are county police commander, you help in reducing crime, you help in fighting femicide, you help in fighting you have certain targets which you meet. You should be promoted faster than somebody else who is in the same level, but their performance indicators are in the negative. Finally, I've been asked 2 questions by the Honorable Mishimboko. The first one is on femicide. It is true, the cases of femicide we are seeing are worrying for the country, and it's also true we have critical gaps, especially at the lower levels of our policing and security apparatus, both the National Intelligence Service, the National Police Service, and also Ngao. And those are things that we need to work on to avoid situations like what we are seeing. The incident that happened in Kware is quite devastating, quite a grave breach of the security of our women, and it's something that I'm taking with all seriousness. Finally, what plans will I have if I am approved by this House to ensure that we do not have loss of life when citizens exercise their right under Article 37? I will be finalizing for publication the guidelines under the Public Order Act, the one I explained earlier, not to take away the light, but to facilitate, to create an environment where it can be enjoyed, to create responsibility on those who are having protests. Because if you say you have a protest to Parliament, for example, and the designated area for protest can only accommodate 1,000 protesters, you cannot say I want 2 million protesters outside Parliament, because it's not feasible. So we'll have to give those guidelines so that as Kenyans can enjoy these rights while respecting the rights of others in accordance with the Constitution. I submit.
Sharia.
Thank you, Chairman. CS nominee, in the court of public opinion and in some independent surveys done in this country, the Ministry of Interior and National Administration has been identified as the one with the highest prevalence of corruption in this country. How do you intend to address this menace if approved?
Let's take Honorable Russ also.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Professor, when a Kenyan reads a Gazette notice of Kenya Gazette, they will tend to believe that is the true reflection of a policy direction from government. In March this year, you closed the Ilo gold mine in Moyale, that it will be closed for 30 days following the skirmishes that had taken place. But since then, over 30 lives have been lost, including that of security officers. That particular area has turned out to be a black market for mineral entrepreneurs, and the citizenry have generally lost faith in government and also in the security agency. My question to you, if the House approves your nomination, what is it that you are likely to do to reaffirm the community's faith in that the government does what it says it will do, and also that the security of that area, because Dabel has the inhabitants community, that the security is restored. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, those of us who come from the border areas, we have very porous borders. There's influx of arms, contraband, drugs, and also illegal immigrants. But what we are experiencing also is so many roadblocks and checkpoints. Some actually are rent seekers as opposed to for purposes of security. Professor, if the House approves your nomination, what is it that you are likely to do to ensure there is security for Kenya, but also the communities that are traversing or traveling on those roads are not, to an extent, inhumanly disadvantaged? Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Professor.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the question by the Honorable Shrie, it is true corruption is a big cancer in the National Police Service, in the public sector of our country, the 2 levels of government and the 3 arms of government. In our assessment of national security threats that are existential in nature, I have said earlier we have identified 5 existential threats to our country's future. Terrorism and violent extremism is one of them. Banditry and other organized crimes is the second. The third one is the problem of narcotic drugs, psychotropic substances, and all that goes with that. The fourth one is climate change and how it is creating disruption of livelihoods and breeding conflicts among communities. The fifth one is corruption. And therefore, going forward, if I'm reappointed, I am going to escalate programs, policies, and measures to eradicate corruption within the organs of the national security that are within the Ministry of Interior, but also propose for the rest of the country, the rest of the government and public sector, measures that can help us secure the country, because it's no longer an issue of the corruption by the police. It's an issue of corruption being able to actually threaten the country's future. And therefore, corruption is top 5 of our national security threat. Lastly, I've been asked about by the Honorable Didoraso about Hilo. It is true. Hilo gold mine in Dabel, Moyale, we closed in March for 30 days, but we've extended those orders. We have identified that area as a disturbed area because we lost some people there who were fighting over mineral rights, mainly illegal miners who had come, even some of them from other countries. So we closed it on security considerations. We are in talks with the Ministry of Mining to see how an orderly resumption of mining activities can happen. I was there physically in June. I was planning to go back in July before this happened. In the interim, we have lost a few people because of illegal activities around there, even as we speak, on a very low scale though. We even lost 2 police officers in the last 2 weeks. So as soon as if I am approved, as soon as I'm in office, I will prioritize the Dabel issue to ensure orderly resumption of lawful mining activities to the benefit of the communities that are there. With regard to borders, the multi-agency roadblocks we have, especially the one in Archer's Post, the one in Mombasa, the Garseni Malindi Highway, all the multi-agency roadblocks are working well, including the Kanyonyo one, the one on Garissa Mwingi, Nairobi Highway. What the criminals have done, those who smuggle arms and aliens and drugs, they are using alternative routes. What am I going to do? The same multi-agency approach that we have used on the main highways. We will increase our surveillance and put multi-agency effort, not necessarily roadblocks, but patrol teams by our special forces on the alternative routes that drug traffickers, human traffickers, and other criminals are using to harm our country. I submit.
Honorable Mule.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, nominee. Honorable Speaker, I want to ask Professor that he came to be the Minister for Interior after the last election and be vetted by this committee and approved, and understanding very clearly the economic policy of the Kenya Kwanza policy of bottom-up economic transformation. You have been in office, and I want to bring you to your attention that the National Assembly put up regulations for private security firms to be regulated properly. And in the view of the better or the bottom up, it was to create employment. But in the time you have been in the office, this industry has suffered tremendous losses whereby you have not given them any regulations. You have not restored order and system in the private sector. And I would wish to know exactly what are you going to do. These private companies have been providing employment to more than almost 1.5 million Kenyans, and they could do better if the government enables proper regulations to create that. And you revoked the license of the Private Security Regulatory Authority, whereby 9 companies plus in this country have not been able to create employment. Are you in the tandem of the idea of creating employment or making sure that there is no more employment and reducing the tax collection for the government? Because that is in your docket, whereby you need to create environment. And being the last person, Mr. Speaker, I would wish to ask the CS to give us a number of activities he has participated in pro bono work in this country, preview to being a CS or after being nominated as a CS in this country. And last but not least, CS, the issue, I'm the last one, so I just want to give him 10 minutes to respond to me. The nominee, the issue of ID in this country is really, really alarming, especially to the young people who are intending to join institutions of higher learning. And I can assure you, quite a number of them, they are not able to register or for admission in the Institute of Higher Learning. What can you do better to make sure that every young people, and especially the Gen Zs, immediately they are clearing their secondary school, they acquire their IDs at the tail end of their Form 4. Why do we have to wait for them to get out to the field and start struggling to get this opportunity? What collaboration will you do with the Ministry of Education? By the time these young people leave school, they already have an ID. We don't need to wait until they get out here to start struggling. What measures are you going to put if, and I'm using the word if carefully, you'll be approved by Parliament and this committee?
Professor.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the private security regulations emanated from our ministry, of course, were presented to National Assembly for approval. So those regulations themselves speak to the fact that we've been actively involved in generating policy, guidance, and framework for this very critical sector. In fact, it is my belief, having interacted now with the ministry for 21 months, that the private security, if a little bit regulated in terms of the curriculum and the kind of content those that are recruited there go through, can help us in providing security for some of the private and not so critical installations. And we can vet some of the deserving cases to even be armed, so that instead of having a police officer manning a supermarket or even a bank, sometimes like it happens in Uganda and other countries, you can have very qualified private security people vetted and armed to supplement the work of the police, so that we don't overstretch the national police officers. On the second issue from the Honorable Mule, it is true that the Private Security Regulatory Authority had revoked 9 licenses. The 9 companies appealed to the Cabinet Secretary, and I reversed that revocation in accordance with Section 43 of the Act. So those licenses that were revoked, they were reinstated on appeal. Then the issue of pro bono work. Pro bono work, I understand it to mean unpaid work. That's the understanding of pro bono work from my very limited legal background. I don't know, like which one now, maybe in church or at home or where. Because since I became minister, I have no free time to do anything. I have no time to do anything. I hardly sleep. I hardly have a weekend. Night and day are the same for me. But before then, I used to volunteer in many activities, some organized by Law Society of Kenya, some organized by church organizations, etc., etc. The last question by the Honorable Mule is on identity cards. We have suffered the current discomfort because of court injunctions. That's number one. Court injunctions for 4 months between last year and early this year, and right now there's even another court injunction. Number two, we have suffered the disruption because of change in technology from the second generation ID to the third generation ID. And I have explained the need for us to change the technology, because the current ID we have, the second generation ID, cannot be recognized outside these countries, cannot even be a travel document. The security features are very rudimentary, very basic. And therefore the move to new technology, better technology, more secure document has caused disruption. Court injunctions have also caused destruction. And just like passports, in the event that I am reappointed, because the member said he used if deliberately, of course, I also want to promise, if I am reappointed, the same way I have focused on reforming the immigration directorate and helping unclog the passport inefficiency problem, I will focus on IDs and also birth and other citizen documents to ensure that we get optimum results. In fact, for example, a death or birth certificate should be obtained the same day, within 12 hours on application. And perhaps the ID, we should be able again to once we get out of the court injunction, we should be able to retain the 7-day target. At the moment, we are working with 21 days before the injunction.
Thank you, Minister Nominee. Sorry, Naisula. I didn't want to go another round.
Speaker, I will not. After this nominee, I'll never ask for another round, and it's not a question, it's just a comment, because I'm very passionate about the issues on North Rift, and if the nominee happens to be approved by this committee and the National Assembly, I would like to just say that even as you deal with security matters and the hardware, please remember also peace and dialogue of those communities. Now that there seems to be some semblance of calm, this is the best opportunity to now engage those communities to deal with the stereotypes, and also for them to be able to remove the criminals among the communities. Please, in case this committee passes you, approves you, ensure that you have a budget that will help you to engage the communities so that we can deal this issue once and for all. For Shakahola and Kware and all the other issues, we want to see action and not just talk.
Yes. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, for the supplementary one. In conclusion, CS Nominee, your appointing authority has considered to the country that one of the failings that the President considered to was lack of communication. You have told us here of very good measures that you have taken in the State Department for Immigration, especially in the processing of passports and all that. However, that information is never in the purview of the public, members of the public. And indeed, I have an incident, CS, where a Kenyan in the US called me very desperate that they could not get their passport despite having paid somebody about 20,000 shillings. For a passport was, I think the normal charge is about 4,000 or 3,000 something. And when I followed up the case, the person who was even paid this bribe was not an officer at the Immigration Department, and it took the intervention of the Director General of Immigration, Ms. Evelyn, to get the DCI to hunt for that person. Somebody extorting Kenyans money from Eastlands, pretending to be working in Nyayo House. And therefore, the lack of communication aspect in your ministry is what I want you to address. Should you, or if you are approved, what are you going to do to ensure that there is proper communication to the public, so that the public are not taken advantage of by criminals out there in Eastlands and elsewhere who are extorting bribes from Kenyans on the pretext that they are working in Nyayo House? And just like Owen Bayer said, you once declared Nyayo House a crime scene. That crime scene now seems to have moved from Nyayo House to the periphery of Nyayo House and other areas. I would want to hear what specific measures you intend to take to make sure there is proper communication. Kenyans know how much they ought to pay and to who, and so that they're not taken advantage of, because you are also aware that has been very rampant.
Chairman, thank you. Chairman, I just wanted to ask the CS this issue of the IDs. Professor, you say the IDs will expire after 10 years. Have you put into consideration the vast areas, people like in North Turkana, how far they travel to get IDs? Because IDs are not like passport, they're essential documents that people must have all the time. After, you know, the kind of, it will be cumbersome for them to go to those centers to go and get IDs. And secondly, on this unrest, you have seen that, as you have said, the IG resigned. But are you aware, in your absence while you are away, we used to have Baba while you are away, but while you are away, that a new IG was appointed?
He's still away, he can't answer that.
No, but that, what is your take? That we were told away. 60 years, Mr. Speaker, I'm putting it in a better way.
Yes.
We were told when somebody reaches 60 years, he should leave the public service. Are you aware that a new IG has been nominated who's 64 years or 63 years, who has retired, who is being recycled? I don't know what extra thing is going to bring. And my last question is on illicit brews. The Interior Ministry has been accused by the Deputy President of sabotaging the war in illicit brews. Is the war on illicit brews only being waged in Mount Kenya? What aspects of this war are being undertaken in the Interior Ministry, and what is being done by the Office of the Deputy President? How much funds have been used in this war in the last 2 years when you were the Interior Ministry, before you were fired?
Nominee, on the issue of the IG, I direct you not to answer the question, because I've received communication from the President nominating the nominee, who will be vetted by a committee of parliament, and those questions can be raised there. If you answer that here, you'll be prejudicing what is coming to parliament. Answer the other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Nasula was a comment, we've taken it on board. Honorable Kimani Chungwa's issue was about communication. When I assumed office in October 2022, I began a habit of every 3-4 months updating the country on the status of our homeland security. We've not had one in a while. I had planned one for June, which was postponed and thereafter disrupted. We will use our public accountability updates on security matters to communicate more on what we are doing. And the next, if I am approved by this House, the next public accountability address will feature more on the reforms we have made at Immigration Department, because I think there we've made a lot of success. People concentrate on the banditry thing, but I think also on the passport issue we made a lot of success. Where we still have problems is the IDs and other aspects of citizenship documents. With regard to the ID, the question by the Honorable Junaid Mohammed, the reason for the 10-year limit, there are two reasons. It's actually one reason. It's because of changes in technology. Unlike the ID we have, which has no security features, and therefore it can be timeless. But we'll find a way of making it convenient to the people of Kenya to renew after the 10 years, so that you don't create a crisis by people, and we can do that by even having a phased out renewal process to ensure that again we don't inconvenience masses of people. So the problem is technology and the security features in the third generation ID, which is going to be physical, that is the Maisha card. It is going to be also digital, the digital ID. You can have it digitally. So all those are options for the third generation ID, quite sophisticated in tandem with the current trends in security on identity documents. With regard to the issue raised on Bruce, I would be hesitant to respond to the comment associated with the Deputy President for obvious reasons. But I think to the best of my knowledge, the Minister of Interior was not cited as frustrating the war. If there are specific officers in the ministry, I think that is something that needs to be looked into to make sure that all of us are reading from the same script. The government policy is to make sure that illicit brews, toxic substances and drugs are not provided to our kids, not just in central Kenya, but everywhere in the country. With regard to how much money the Deputy President office has used, again, I am not privy, and I think that is the office that can answer that question. How much funds have we used in the fight against brew? We have not allocated any special budget in the Ministry of Interior in the fight against illicit alcoholic drinks and drugs. We have used our normal budgets, our normal security operations budget to carry out that program as part of the normal programs. I submit.
Professor, I'll ask you one or two questions. The first one is a furtherance on the issue of IDs. As you introduce a 10-year ID, just take into account that an ID in this country is everything. You can't enter a supermarket, you can't open a bank account. The old and PWDs cannot access social safety net funds without an ID. Now, if you are going to have that ID last for 10 years, then you must put in place a seamless renewal process so that people don't suffer because of failure to renew an ID card. And if you are approved to go back to office, I would want to see that you draft regulations that will guide and manage renewal of IDs and bring to Parliament for approval. The second issue I want to ask you, nobody asked you, prisons fall under your authority if you are approved. What are you doing, or what do you propose to do about prison reforms? I remember when we were senators and we went with you to Kitui, and we found prisoners literally half naked, poorly dressed, and looking like they were very poor hygienic conditions in which they were operating. What are you going to do, if approved, in prison reforms to make prisons more humane? And also, what are you going to do to reverse the continuing stealing and grabbing of public land occupied by prisons in the country, which is going on all over? Thirdly, the new constitution allows Kenyans who had left the country, taken greener pastures, and acquired citizenships of other countries to reacquire Kenyan citizenship on application. That's what the constitution says. But we get a lot of communication and phone calls from Kenyans out there who are struggling to reclaim their citizenship because they have either British or American or whatever citizenship. What are you doing to simplify? Because the Constitution says you reclaim your citizenship on application. What are you going to do to simplify the process of reclaiming citizenship by Kenyans who lost their citizenship? If you can answer those, then I'll come to other simpler questions to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, on the first issue of IDs, I agree with your recommendation and guidance that we should consider a seamless transition from after the 10 years to avoid creating a crisis. I believe it will be possible because we had a similar situation with passports when we went into e-passports. So what you do, for example, is to say that the ID that has expired will continue operating until you get a new one, for example, because you cannot be faulted because of a government administrative measure. Number two, we will make sure that we anticipate and put in place a rapid response initiative where you deploy additional facilities, additional service points, additional personnel, even if it's on a temporary basis, at a time when many of these IDs will be expiring. But by and large, the old ID, the expired ID should work until when the state gives you a new one, because it's simply for technology purposes, safety features. It is not that we will give again another ID. It might even be the same depending on whether or not we will consider that ID as being secure, a secure document by that time. With regard to regulations as guided, we will prioritize that, Mr. Speaker. With regard to Kenya prisons, we have part of the Maraga Task Force report. We have a number of recommendations on modernizing and reforming the prisons, which we are taking up. I have prepared a CAB memo, which had not been submitted to Cabinet, but I'm sure if I'm reappointed, that will be a priority. And the areas of reform include making the prison enterprises more productive by investing in better technology in their workshops to make sure they produce more competitive goods which are affordable. Number two, welfare issues.
In fact, these seats you see here were made by prisons.
Absolutely. So if they are empowered, because that is labor and skill is available, if they are given better equipment and for carpentry, for masonry and other skills in the prisons, we are going to have better output and generate more revenue and avoid the prisons relying on S-check all the time in these times of constrained budget. We also want to make sure that we improve on welfare issues, including the terms and conditions of service of prison wardens. Is part of the Maraga Task Force recommendation in consultation with the SRC. We also are working on software issues, for example, providing mattresses. We have a program called One Prisoner, One Mattress program, where up to now we have provided 10,000 from our budget, but also with the support of other partners. And we want to make sure that every prisoner at least has a mattress, as we even work on physical facilities and the housing for our prison warders. We want to construct 28,000, and we have already, I think, I don't have the figures right now, but I think we've done nearly 500 in different prison facilities. We want to do 28,000, which should almost meet the entire demand, because that is almost the population of our prison personnel complement. Other than that, the prison land, there are certain serious encroachments on prison land. The most notorious one is the Kitale prison land, where out of the 3,000 acres, only less than 300 are available. The rest have been grabbed by powerful and former senior people in various administrations and their friends. We will have to recover it. We have engaged the National Land Commission and other stakeholders. We will recover the land. They say that every prison land must have a title deed. Many of our prison lands are not titled, so we are working protected through titling. The last question, Mr. Speaker, sir, you asked is about those Kenyans who are regaining citizenship. We have made tremendous progress, and I want to admit, in line with what the leader of majority said, I think the communication is what we need to improve on. We have made tremendous improvement and citizenship applications by foreign nationals who want to be Kenyans, but also by Kenyans who had lost their nationality before the 2010 Constitution and are now entitled to reapply. When I came to office, there were 2,700 pending applications. I cleared the backlog within 30 days. Right now, we are receiving applications on a rolling basis. I had directed the directorate to ensure that from the time of application to the time the minister signs off that application for regaining citizenship, it should not be more than 21 days. And I think that is work in progress. Lastly, how do we simplify? We will reduce the paperwork. There is a bit of paperwork in that directorate, and we want to reduce it and go digital and make sure that we even bring the timelines from 21 days to 7 days to possibly 3 days on application. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lastly, nominee, do you hold any leadership position in any political party?
No.
Have you ever been adversely mentioned in any integrity-related reports?
No.
On investigations? Do you hold citizenship of any other country?
No.
What is your worth?
694 million.
Made of?
Made of I have 2 homes, one in Nairobi and one in Tharaka Nithi. Then I have landed buildings, about 235 million. My 2 homes are worth 190 million. And then I also have savings in SACCOs and banks. I also do legal practice, so I have a bit of revenue that I've generated through my law firm, and that is it. And I forgot, Mr. Speaker, when I was filling in, I forgot to add, I have vehicles of about 17 million, which are not part of that report. I apologize. I remembered after I had submitted the questionnaire.
Honorable members, we received a memoranda from one Eliud Karanja Matindi, Isaac Alwacher, Joseph Mwathi Nyanjui, Khalid Ibrahim, Aisha Adan, Sonia Mushila, Masi Murugi Kuria, Ahmed Sigat, Okio Mtato Koit, David Malombe, and Collins Onyango. We forwarded them to the nominee, and the nominee responded to all of them in writing. We have them on record. Professor, we allocated 2 hours. We've done with you 2 hours and 10 minutes. We want to inform you that this brings to an end our interaction with you. The clerk has checked all your documents against what you submitted have been found to be correct and in order. And unless you are lawfully held, you are now released to go to your other businesses. Members, I'll give